The world remembers kings, emperors, and conquerors, but the story of America began with a man who wanted none of those crowns. George Washington, a name carved into mountains, stamped on money, whispered in schoolrooms, was not born to destiny. He was born into struggle, into soil, into the raw uncertainty of a colony at the edge of empires. This is not the story of a marble statue, nor of a myth polished by textbooks. This is the story of a boy who lost his father young, a soldier who tasted defeat before he ever knew victory, a leader who carried a weary army across frozen rivers, and a man who chose to lay down power when the world begged him to keep it. And it begins on a cold February day in 1732.
George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia. He entered a world where Britain ruled the colonies, where tobacco plantations thrived on enslaved labor, and where land was wealth. His father, Augustine Washington, died when George was just 11. This was the first fracture in his young life, the moment he learned that certainty does not exist. Unlike many great men of history, Washington did not inherit riches or titles. He inherited responsibility. He was tall for his age, broad-shouldered, but quiet. He did not have the brilliance of letters, his handwriting was stiff, his spelling imperfect. Yet what he lacked in pen, he made up for in discipline. He learned surveying, walking through forests with compass and chain, but young Washington also carried an ambition that could not be ignored. He watched the Virginia elite, the planters, the politicians, and longed to rise. He wanted honor, not comfort. He wanted a name. At 22, Washington's chance came. The frontier burned with tension between Britain and France. The Ohio Valley, rich and vast, was a chessboard of empires. In 1754, Governor Dinwiddie sent Washington to confront the French. Here, Washington faced his first great twist of fate. At the Battle of Jumonville Glen, a French envoy was killed under confusing circumstances, and Washington, not fluent in French, signed documents admitting to assassination. The world called him guilty. A stain marked his reputation. Soon after, at Fort Necessity, his small force was surrounded by the French and their native allies. Rain soaked his gunpowder, men panicked, and Washington surrendered. It was humiliation. The tall Virginian who longed for honor now carried the weight of failure. But here lay the paradox of Washington. Every defeat sharpened him. From this disaster, he learned patience. From retreat, he learned survival. From shame, he learned resilience. By the end of the French and Indian War in 1763, Washington was no master strategist, but he had become something more dangerous, a man who understood endurance. The war ended, but peace was bitter. Britain taxed its colonies to pay for the conflict. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Tea Act. The colonies seethed. Washington, now a wealthy planter at Mount Vernon, watched carefully. He was no radical. He loved order, hierarchy, and honor, but he hated tyranny more. As Britain tightened its grip, Washington's loyalty frayed. By 1774, he stood with Virginia's patriots. When revolution erupted in 1775, the Continental Congress turned to him. Why him? Because he was tall, dignified, a Virginian who could unite North and South. He wore his uniform, signaling readiness, and though he did not ask for command, he accepted it with solemn resolve. The Revolutionary War was not a blaze of glory.
It was starvation, disease, retreat, and survival. Washington lost more battles than he won, yet his genius was not in victories, but in refusing annihilation. In December 1776, when morale collapsed, Washington struck. Crossing the icy Delaware River, he surprised Hessian troops at Trenton. It was a small battle, but it saved the Revolution. At Valley Forge in 1777, his men froze. Barefoot soldiers left bloody trails in the snow. Washington stayed among them, not above them. His presence alone held the army together. Finally, in 1781, with French allies, he cornered Cornwallis at Yorktown. Cannons roared, trenches advanced, and Britain surrendered. Against impossible odds, Washington had delivered independence.
But his greatest act came not in war but after it. The world expected him to seize power, to crown himself King of America. Instead, he resigned his command and returned to Mount Vernon. King George III, hearing this, reportedly said, "If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world." Washington did it, and he became the greatest. In 1789, the new nation begged him back. George Washington was unanimously elected the first president of the United States. He did not want it, but he took the office out of duty. As president, he shaped everything. He created the cabinet, balanced feuding parties, kept peace between Britain and France, and oversaw the birth of a new government. He refused to be called His Highness, insisting on Mr. President. In 1793, he faced a crisis. The French Revolution spilled blood across Europe, and both Britain and France pulled America to their side. Washington, against enormous pressure, chose neutrality. His decision saved the fragile nation from ruin. After 2 terms, he stepped down. In his farewell address of 1796, he warned against political parties and foreign entanglements. America did not always listen, but his words echoed for centuries. Retiring to Mount Vernon, Washington hoped for peace, but fate had one last twist. On December 12, 1799, after riding through rain and snow, he developed a sore throat. The infection spread rapidly. Doctors bled him repeatedly, a common practice of the time, until he grew weak. On December 14, 1799, George Washington died at age 67. His last words, "'Tis well." The world mourned. Napoleon called him the greatest man of the age. The new nation cried as if it had lost its father. George Washington's fame was not built on words, nor genius, nor conquest. It was built on restraint. He became the most famous man in America, not because he seized power, but because he gave it back. Statues rise, paintings hang, monuments stretch, but the true memory of Washington is simpler. A man who could have been king, but chose to be free. Narrator, soft reflective. America has had many heroes, but only one father. His name was George Washington.